But the fight for justice never ends. Legal justice, climate justice, economic justice, social justice.
From our comrade Liz Martin, the fact that you've spoken so many times, I now remember your name. You're welcome, by the way. I've completely forgotten what I was going to say, to be honest, but yeah, support the motion, solidarity, comrades.
Misogyny is defined as the hatred of, contempt for and prejudice against women and girls. A perfect example of this was when our esteemed leader, Deputy Leader Angela Rayner, was said to have worn a skirt in Parliament, which put Boris Johnson off doing his job. The next time she did wear a pair of pants, the tractor porn came out. And today we also have growing concerns about incel groups. For awareness and a brief definition, incels are men dominant on the internet who admit to hating women. Incel groups are growing threats, and as boys as young as 13 have now been recruited into these incel groups. Sexual harassment can be comments, wolf whistling, touching. Again, these are amongst other categories. These personal comments are sometimes quite mistaken by misogynistic men to be compliments, but they're not compliments. Legislation to make misogyny a hate crime, to be recorded as such by all police forces across the UK and prosecuted by the Crown Prosecution Service. Currently, in our country, only 12 police forces do this. Police should be required to record all instances of femicide, which is killing of a woman by a man, to assess the extent of impact of incel groups, and the policy resources should be increased to ensure the police forces are able to do this.
Recently in Sandwell we had some conflict and protests, as we saw on the streets in Smethwick and Leicester. When those angry young men were dispersed by the police, no doubt they went home and took out their anger on the women in their home. Making misogyny a hate crime will truly help bring home to people across all of society that this needs to be taken seriously by everyone and the police.
It was under a Labour Police and Crime Commissioner that Nottinghamshire Police paved the way by being the first to recognise misogyny as a hate crime, with the aim of making women safer on our streets.
I'd like to emphasise that abortion is healthcare. This is targeted gendered harassment, and it is persistent and spiteful misogyny. The protesters have well-funded and well-organised backing from right-wing religious groups in America. They will be abusing women outside my hospital 12 hours a day, starting on Thursday. Conference, the women of Britain, our sisters, deserve our backing. Please vote yes to Composite 11, and let's treat misogyny as the hate crime that it surely is.
Young men policing themselves, having a lack of trust in the police, limited opportunities and boundless barriers is a recipe for disaster. That's why it's so important we need more black men representation in this party.
Suella Braverman wrote to police leaders just this week on Saturday saying diversion and inclusion wasn't important. But it is important. In Nottinghamshire, we were the first police force to declare misogyny a hate crime. We recruited more black officers, double the number of black officers. 50% of all new police officers are women. And that's going to change the culture of the organisation.
Because Labour knows that you don't get social justice if you don't have justice and you don't feel safe. We will make sure that the immigration system is fair and firm and properly managed. And unlike the Tories, we will work with France to prevent dangerous small boats crossing the Channel and putting lives at risk, with a new cross-border police unit to crack down on the criminal gangs who make millions from trading in people and profiting from their lives, paid for by cancelling the deeply damaging, extortionately expensive, unworkable and unethical Rwanda plan. We will keep Channel 4 in public hands. And we will secure the future of the BBC as a universal, publicly owned broadcaster. Let's be honest, this just isn't a task that Truss's Tories can take on. To them, regulation is a dirty word.
Often I'm the only woman of colour in the room when climate change is on the agenda. So when we talk about the climate agenda or the green economy, we tend to focus on transport, energy, buildings and other hard infrastructure. When I was a software engineer at Marconi, we used to say that there were three things: technology, processes and people. So what I'm saying is that we also need to think about and put at the centre of our thinking people and consider the importance of diversity within the green agenda. If you face the barriers in riding a bike in types of clothes, or there's a view in your culture around norms around virginity, etc., then those barriers need to be understood and recognised and planned for climate agenda. So we can build all the cycle lanes, for example, that we want to, but we're not going to achieve our goals if we don't consider the barriers and the way in which people experience those barriers.
Who suffers in this energy crisis? Who suffers? The poorest, the elderly, the disabled, the long-term ill, ethnic minorities.
Thanks, comrades.
A right to vote. The politics of a right to a job, the right to a wage, the right to a house, the right to a decent salary, the right to a decent education for your kids, the right to dream, the right to hope, the right simply to exist. For a 10-year-old boy, I learned a very big lesson that day. As a nation, we will become that 10-year-old boy.
Violence against women and girls. All those in favour? All those against? I think that's unanimous. Okay, thank you.
We will stand alongside Ukraine's people, fighting on the front line of opponents. Slava Ukraine! As a human rights lawyer, I took on governments who wanted to keep the barbaric practice of death by hanging. That's why we had to rip out anti-Semitism by its roots. I've seen home ownership rise almost my entire life. It's the bedrock of security and aspiration. That pebble-dash semi meant everything to my family. But now, under the Tories, the dream of owning your own home is slipping away for too many. And that's a political choice. Because if you keep inflating demand without increasing supply, house prices will only rise and homes become less affordable for working people.
We'll shortly be progressing with the Britain in the World debate, but we could not discuss Britain in the World without addressing the situation in Ukraine. So please now stand for the Ukrainian national anthem sung by the Svitoch Ukrainian choir.
Наші вороги що тілом, що ми браття. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
Ukrainian,
Ukrainian, Ukraine, Ukrainian, Ukrainians, Ukraine, Ukrainian, Ukraine. Though winter will be cold and difficult for all of us, it must become impossible for Russia. There are enough Russian oligarchic mansions, corporate structures and money in the UK to at least cover part of the rebuilding process necessary in Ukraine. Ukraine. Slava Ukraine, glory to Britain, glory to the heroes, and glory to the British people.
Ukrainian forces, Ukrainian people. Support to Ukraine. Labour stands unshakably with NATO allies in providing military, economic, diplomatic and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine.
Ukraine. The climate crisis is the biggest challenge the world faces, devastating millions of lives. Just as Robin Cook introduced an ethical dimension to our foreign policy in the 90s, the next Labour government will introduce a green dimension. Labour's foreign policy will be green. We will push for climate action to become a fourth pillar of the United Nations. And as recommended by Lord Ray Collins' review, we will seek to work with allies and partners to create a new international law that backs up that pillar on the UN Council, and we will make ecocide against international law. A Labour government will restore our 0.7% aid target. No more cuts to international aid. No more cuts to the British Council. No more cuts to the BBC World Service. When the Conservatives say they want to slash international aid, what do we say, conference? We say no, we won't do it. When the Conservatives say they want to deport refugees to Rwanda, what do we say, conference?
Ukraine. Friends, this is what fascism looks like. Ukraine, you cannot negotiate in good faith with fascists. You must never appease fascists. When confronted with fascism, you must defeat it. Ukraine.
It is perfect for Russian tanks to roll through the Ukrainian countryside, raping, torturing and murdering my people. Ukraine.
Conference, the climate emergency is this century's biggest threat to humanity. That is why I am also announcing today that Labour will legislate to make sure Britain's aid budget helps address climate change.
Ukraine.
When his comrades
Ukraine.
And I'm looking for a woman.
comrades.
Ukraine.
Ukraine.
If you support this motion 13 on Ukraine, you are not supporting the Ukrainian people. You are supporting only the United States. You are supporting neoliberalism. You are supporting imperialism.
Sorry, excuse me, delegate. This is a debate. You've got to listen to all points of view, please.
Conference, I stand in support of Composite 13 and the people of Ukraine. You do not speak for our party, you do not speak for our movement, and we will never stand for it again. Glory to Ukraine. Thank you.
Ukraine is a European democracy. It is also a sovereign nation, has not asked for this aggression. They have been victims in this war. We need to support them. I dread to think what would happen if the British ever walked back into Dublin and said, well, we were here before, we can come back again.
Ukraine. We share the same values: democracy, freedom, human rights, respect for international law. Ukraine. Let's draw one more lesson from Ukraine.
The Ukrainian government that is repressing the left in their own country, a government that is criminalizing socialist parties and imprisoning Ukrainian activists.